You might not know who Marq Collins is, but you know the bands he's introduced you to.
You're the first person to ever play Garbage in the United States of America. You kicked off our career, and you never forget that as a band. The first person who plays your record is forever family, forever loved. Marq Collins, we love you. We know that you have crazy talent, much like me. You're an incredible tastemaker. We are so grateful to you. We would have no career without you.
But even if you have known that, what you probably haven't heard before is that this is just the tip of the iceberg. An iceberg that was hit by the Titanic.
Pardon the interruption to your broadcast. My name is Marq Collins, and I'm here to announce the end of bad radio on this frequency.
It suddenly felt like Seattle was on the map in a way that it hadn't been before, and Marco was that megaphone.
Marco jumped out of the radio and made you take notice.
Hey, this is Eddie, and you're listening to Marq Collins.
Somebody said to me, oh, you'll learn how to play the game.
Plenty of sunshine through today.
I'm going to learn how to play the game better.
He was kind of a rock star himself. He was the on-off switch for your career.
Bands that come to mind that Marco broke.
Weezer.
President of the United States.
In the studio with me is Beck.
He was early on electronic music.
I have the Prodigy up next.
Hi, we are from Daft Punk.
Hi, this is Tom from the Chemical Brothers.
Marco wasn't scared to put his weight behind a track that he believed in.
Breaking the law! Breaking the law!
He's playing music that we're not allowed to hear.
You reach this sort of level of success, and pretty soon it all catches up with you.
The scene was very challenging to not get sucked into.
Other priorities took over, unfortunately.
I feel like I dropped the ball back then.
I mean, he's got many addictions, but his addiction to music is his life.
Not having a radio show is pushing me to invent me.
Marco is still out there taking a chance on new music. He is not resting on, like, I was really something in the 90s. You know, who the cares?
You gotta be willing to pioneer, and that's the story of Marq Collins.
Who knows? He might just be getting started.
Whether you see this as an origin, redemption, or tragic story, there's no denying Marq Collins may have been one of the first few to have ever been labeled influencer, a title that has a lot of meaning these days. As we turn the spotlight on the story of a bygone era and a pioneer in all the glamour and the squalor. I have to imagine when I don't know how this all began. Did you meet Marco and he kind of told you his story? Where were you in terms of the evolution of deciding that this was going to be a documentary?
Yeah, I wasn't familiar with Marco when I first kind of found this story. I realized later my wife, who grew up in the area, listened to him all the time. My friends listened to him every single night, but I didn't know him. I was from different side of the state, didn't have that station. What happened was in 2011, I was listening to the radio, and it just so happened that was the only channel that was coming in where I was, 107.7 The End. So I knew of the station from when I was younger, but just happened to be listening to it this day in like September 2011. And they were doing a 20-year anniversary show of when the station first started, which was September 1991. And they were playing back the 107 songs that kind of made the station what it was. I'm sure Smells Like Teen Spirit was probably number one. But they also had the famous radio DJs from the station come back to tell their best stories. And every time Marco came on, this was over the course of a weekend, it was just a great story, just the enthusiasm. And it just really took me to like Seattle 1991. And I started thinking, wow, this could be a good script. I thought maybe I'd write a script for it. Midnight in Paris had just come out. So I was thinking maybe it's kind of like a more modern take on, instead of 1920s in Paris, it's 1991 Seattle. And there's this radio DJ that's right in the middle of everything that's going on. So that was the initial idea. And I think I even wrote like 10 pages that day, just kind of the initial ideas. But then as I was researching, I came across an article that had been written about Marco, and it was released only 2 weeks prior. So the timing on that was great. So I saw this feature article that kind of detailed his rise and fall, and it hit a lot of the themes that ended up being important themes of the movie, like his sexuality and his struggle with addiction and those things. So it was when I read that article that I realized, like, okay, this actually could be probably better served as a documentary. We've had some people talk to us in the years since about maybe turning it into a narrative feature, and that could be interesting to do still someday. But yeah, that's kind of the origin of it.
What is your background? Are you just wanted to be a filmmaker, so documentaries spoke to you?
Yeah,
or?
I got into it later. I didn't really think about that at all growing up. I thought I'd be like a baseball player or own businesses or something. And I went to school, got a degree in business, and after college went into sales and sales management, and did that for like 7 years. And by the end of it, just hated it. But it was harder and harder to like get out of it because, you start making more money and buying things. And it got to the point where like every day I was going to work and I was like almost like sick to my stomach and wanted to do something more creative. My brother actually has been in the film industry. This is what he wanted to do forever. And he did a movie in like 2006 called Americana with Dennis Hopper, Joshua Jackson. That was his first movie that he directed. And so he kind of helped pave the way. And then in 2010, I quit my job. My wife and I traveled a little bit. And then when we came back, my brother and I started making a movie in Haiti, a movie that we're actually still making. It's kind of like a Boyhood type thing as a documentary. So that ended up kind of being my film school. And then I just got the bug right away. Like I just was looking for projects. And that's when I found this project, the Glamour and The Squalor story of Marco, and been doing it ever since. So, for the past like 11 years has been just like loving loving filmmaking, loving just the creative life and wanting to be able to continue it however I can.
You follow Marco through some good times and some bad times. There's moments, and in doing so as a documentary filmmaker, one of the hardest things to do is to stay documenting, right? And not interject yourself. How difficult was it for you in that process to kind of stay out of Marco's way in certain aspects?
Yeah. Well, it's very, I think, like one of the documentary 101 rules is just don't assume you know everything. I'm personally kind of attracted to stories that happened in the past, and then I want to also bring in a couple like present day threads. That seems to be what makes sense to me. That's what the Glamour and The Squalor is. So I thought I knew what happened in the past, but I certainly learned a lot more. And then I wanted to make sure I was totally open to whatever happened in like, the current storylines that we were following. And yeah, it's tough. And again, I love like archive films. So there's that element of it. Like, I just love like puzzle side of it, like piecing all, putting all those pieces together. And then the verite side, I marvel at a good friend of mine, Jeff Gilbert, is an editor who edited The Glamour and The Squalor, but he cut like The Overnighters and Boys State more recently. And those are 100% verite films, and the filmmakers just embed themselves with the subjects. And I'm like, I just don't know if I could do that for a lot of different reasons. Yeah, there still has to be direction. There still has to he's like, what am I going to do, right? And so you've got to be directing, but also it's that balance, that fine line of making yourself invisible after you've hopefully communicated what it is that you're looking for, and then also not being afraid to actually say like, can you say that one more time, or what, that was wow, I didn't know that was. Let's try to get him to frame it a different way to repeat something. So it's an interesting thing with documentary when you're directing, because you are directing, but yeah, you're not trying to like influence necessarily emotions, I guess.
And the other thing is, since it is about his life for the most part, and kind of you go over some of the good and the bad as well, gaining the documentary subject's trust is a huge aspect of being able to be open and show a lot more than you possibly would have if you just closed it down to archival footage and what have you.
Yeah.
So when do you feel like you actually gained his trust?
I think a lot of it happened in like the 6 months of him deciding if he wanted to do it or not. After I, approached him with this, and because he realized that if he was going to do it, he wanted to go all in, be 100% vulnerable, really tell his story raw. And so it took a while for him to do that. So I think that was that. But then honestly, I think we were trying to, I think he struggles with trust from a lot of just his life. And I think we were still trying to gain it all the way through the process. And there's an interview that we got with him. The film was almost done. Like we were watching it back. We had, advanced rough cuts, and it was like, we're just not quite there with him. There's still something that he's kind of like guarding emotionally. And we were honest with him about that. And he kind of understood like, okay, yeah, I can, it's going to be rough, but I can go a little bit deeper with you guys. And that was kind of like the last thing I felt like we needed to really emotionally get the film where it needed to be. So it's, you're totally right. Like trust is the most important thing. And it was a struggle, but I think we got there. And I think, it was needed, obviously.
Here we are, Meta Vista. This is where I grew up. This is the most mundane, boring place to ever live. It was all shit kickers and new families. This was my first job, my first official job. I cleaned parts for a mechanic. This was the butchest job I've ever had. Placer Hill School, I went here. Oh, and this is where we played Smear the Queer, which was okay in school back in the day. Smear the Queer. It was rough, man. It was definitely a small town vibe. It was not welcoming to people that didn't fit the mold. When I hear songs from the 70s, it reminds me of being on the bus right here at this school, whatever song it is, the night Chicago died, something like that. It takes me right back to being right here on the school bus. I was bullied severely. I couldn't sit in the front of the bus, I couldn't sit in the back of the bus. No matter where I sat, I got beat up. I was a feminine kid with long hair. I was the last guy whose voice changed. Everybody thought I was a girl forever, so I got picked on even more for that reason. And I remember thinking, you've got to change all of this. I friggin' hated tetherball because I'd always get bashed in the head with this friggin' ball, and you're always up against like Ernie Opdyke or something like that, and that guy was fucking crazy. I just remember thinking, I am not cut out for this shit. I am not cut out for this macho competition thing. I remember my father and I getting in these huge fights over it. He wanted me to be something that I was not. He wanted me to be the football player. He wanted me to be a sports guy. I fucking hated sports.
What does a kid want to do at 13? I know what I wanted to do. He had a different take on that. He pissed me off.
My dad, he had a hard time with Marq for years. There was a lot of yelling and that sort of thing. It scared the crap out of me.
There's no pleasing him. He wanted the football playing jock, and he got the artistic, creative, emotional gay kid. God played a joke on him.
I think he had an understanding of what was needed too. Again, if he's going to do this, he's going to put himself out there, like might as well go all the way. And I think he just didn't necessarily know how far all the way actually was until a little bit later. And then it was like, oh boy, this is like, I didn't realize I had to go this far. But I think we were, as honest as we could. There was things we didn't even know early on, but as far as like what we were going to do. But I mean, we traveled to New York, and he's standing right out in front of the apartment where he pretty much hit rock bottom, and he's telling the story right in front of that place. And that had to be tough to revisit those old things, but he did it, and he showed up every time.
His maverick nature, he's a maverick in the business that he, perfected early on in his life, and I'm curious if any of that kind of rubbed off on you. Do you feel like you have a good sense of risk taking and maverickism isn't a word, but of exploring that sense in yourself? Do you feel like you kind of gained a little bit of that?
Yeah, maybe. I didn't really, it's a good question. I didn't really thought of if I gained anything from the experience with him. And I definitely do have like a risk-taking nature, but I almost sometimes look at it as like, am I just stupid? Like we my wife and I both like quit our jobs in 2010 and traveled a little and went into this, and we're having our first and only kid at that same time. And I'm just like, God, looking back, I'm like, that was not very responsible. I mean, it was very much a risk, and we're still, trying to make it work. We're both in the creative field, and we do, documentary. We just published a couple books last year, and we're just trying to make it work still. And, we love this life. Like, the creative life is the best life. So yeah, I don't know if it's like risk taking or just like doing what you love, I think, and that's it for, like, I can't imagine doing anything else. And I definitely in my work, try to take risks. And I think, I don't know with Marco, if he ever if he viewed it as much as like he's taking risks, or if it was just his whole motto has always been like, he loves music and he wants to, and he wants to follow the music that guides his life.
Yeah.
And he just loves to introduce people to new good music. And like in 1991, he had a radio station with 3 million people listening per night, and he was playing Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit for the first time. And so it just worked out that way. But he's still doing the exact same thing. He's just playing music that he loves, and he can communicate it so well too. I think that's one of the reasons he's been so successful, is just the way that he talks about it with the enthusiasm and the knowledge, and that's what attracts people to him.
It was a big deal for us to secure a supporter in Marco, because he was considered a big tastemaker back then, and he did have influence on the scene. So God bless him. If he's out there listening. Am I allowed to look at the camera, Marco? Thank you so much, baby.
Oh, he was so arrogant. He was so full of himself, and I don't think it didn't help that everyone was following him around, to give him whatever he wanted. And so I think at that time it was more, he was the it boy. He was good looking. He obviously had a great ear for music. He was funny. And he wielded a lot of respect and power, and I think that at that time it was pretty amazing to watch him sort of stroll around and do his thing.
You get a sense, having talked to all these luminaries and musicians and people in the business, do you get a sense that there will ever be a period of time like we experienced? Do you ever think there's going to be another revolution?
It's so hard to say, because, well, one, not the same, because everything's fragmented now, right? Like back then we had the radio, we had radio, and we had MTV. So, and then if you were in Seattle, you had 107.7 The End, you had Marco. So that'll never be the same. But it's hard to say, like when I think of like the revolution of like Nirvana, I don't know, is BTS the same thing, but even bigger now?
Yeah.
And I have no idea how like the history of like that group and like K-pop, how that broke into the mainstream. But so it's hard to say. I mean, everything's definitely different.
Yeah.
And so like they're the first group that comes to mind, because I know they're probably the most famous group in the world. But I don't know even like where their music gets played. Like, personally, I don't know. I mean, like, I'm sure it's on the radio.
Right.
Yeah, so I don't know. It's just different times. The way that it happened back in the 90s, no, it'll never happen that way again. But I certainly hope there's another rock revolution, because there's pop that I like, but I would, I'm more into like indie rock and folk rock and stuff, and it'd be cool if something somehow happened where that was like another rock revolution.
Did you? I mean, you explored a little bit of what he's doing now, and his involvement with social media. Did he champion places like Bandcamp and things like that? Did you find that there was outlets that he's kind of preferring to at this point to kind of find new music?
Yeah, I think it's certainly Bandcamp. I mean, he was on Slacker Radio for a while. I mean, there's all these new kind of startup stations. There was a station when we were making the movie that he was on the air full time, Jet City Radio, which was all Seattle music. So it was kind of an interesting concept, and they were hoping to roll it out to other markets where it was all the music was either from or had a link to the home market, in this case Seattle, but it was all genres. You could play whatever kind of music you wanted. That was pretty cool, and he was pretty successful with it. But it was a startup that he was hired on. I think they just kind of ran out of money. I mean, Bandcamp, I think he's so pro artist, and so he wants to help these bands. He wants to introduce the music to more people. And then if Bandcamp, for instance, is the one where the artist benefits the most, which right now they are, especially with their free, they get all the music, I think, on like Fridays or something like that. They get all the money for the sales. So I know he's sending people to Bandcamp to check out bands because they're making the most. I just saw some study, some band made more money. They did a op-ed. They made more money in one day on Bandcamp than they did in 6 years from like Spotify and Apple. So it's, I don't know. I mean, the industry's it's messed up, but hopefully they can get back into touring for films. We can be doing festivals and theatrical and everything. But I don't know, the streaming thing. We're all still navigating it, I think.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned that you like a verite style, but there's so much to unpack in here, and there's so many layers to this. And I mean, you even have a little bit of a mystery with the record and everything like that, and it's very interesting in that respect. Did you have a hard time in the edit deciding which direction you wanted to go and how much to pack in there, or was it more of a, if I sprinkle a little bit of this and sprinkle a little bit of that, it might actually turn out to be kind of verite in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, we knew there'd be some verite stuff. I definitely like the collage style of like elements with hopefully a sometimes 3-act structure a lot of times gets a bad rap, but I still think that even like the filmmakers that are trashing 3-act structure, when you look at their films, it's like, yeah, maybe it's not an exact 3-act structure, but it's still structured in a way that an audience can follow, and that's whether it's the hero's journey or whatever. So I like I want to tell a story that is structured like that. And I always, when we're editing, I'm always thinking like, okay, if we were writing this, what would the next scene be? And that a lot of times will help kind of dictate how the edit goes. But I like collage as far as the elements go. Like I love interviews, verite, archive, recreations, animation, which all of that is in the Glamour and the Squalor. And part of that was just because that's what was needed. Like we didn't have a ton of archive with this. So it's like, okay, how do we tell this story creatively? So that would either be animation, photos, recreation. But that's also my favorite part. Like I love the editing process much more than any other part of filmmaking. And when you get to work with somebody like Jeff Gilbert, I learned so much from him. But it was interesting too, because when I go back and look at the outline that we had before we even started making the movie, it kind of looks pretty similar to what the movie ended up being. So we had an idea what happened inside of each scene was obviously evolved and was different, but the outline from like kind of theme to theme actually held up pretty well.
Nice. So there was a pre-production process in this. Then you had some kind of plan going in.
Yeah, we definitely had, a good idea of the story and the present day elements that we wanted to bring. Knew we wanted to, take him back to his hometown, take him to New York, had a long interview list of people that we were hoping to interview. And that's, when you're working with a lot of these people are like rock stars, it's, you got to try to get into the schedule. So that took the longest part. And then one thing that I learned on this, we shot a lot of kind of my ideas that I thought maybe would be B-roll or recreation type stuff that ended up not going in the film. And that's something that I learned from. It's like, okay, well, I'm not going to do that again. Let's cut the film with like the archive and the interviews and the verite. So we have a story, and then let's like make a 2 or 3 week production to go actually just shoot, a shot list of things. So, cause we spent a lot of days shooting just ideas early on when kind of we were waiting for like interviews to get scheduled or whatever. It was just, kind of a rookie mistake. My first film thinking like, oh, we got to stay busy. Like, let's go shoot this. And it ended up being like a waste of time.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Most people wouldn't share that, so I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, that was definitely a big thing that I've taken to other projects. And sometimes I have to remind myself to be patient. Like, okay, you're excited about this idea, but this might not be because the story at some point is going to take on a life of its own. The film's going to take on a life of its own. And before to make any decisions and to spend time and money or whatever, before for sure that that's going to go in there, it's like I said, it was a rookie mistake.
Are you planning? You had mentioned, that some people have whispered narrative in your ear, and that you're looking at some other things. Are you planning documentary to stay in the documentary field, or do you feel like narrative might have a calling for you?
I definitely love documentary because, again, I love finding the story in the edit. That's probably my favorite part of documentary filmmaking. So I've got another film coming out this year called Clay Dream about the father of claymation, Will Vinton,
Nice.
and his rise and fall story, which it's going to surprise a lot of people. Most people don't know the story, which it's really dramatic. We've been kind of billing it as like the Social Network beats the Mr. Rogers documentary. But the Social Network, the Facebook story, it's an interesting business story.
We were rebels, we were in Portland, we were doing stop motion. We didn't have big money behind us. It was just like the little studio that could.
He really wanted to be the next Walt Disney.
And it looked as if maybe that were happening.
The winner is Closed Mondays, Will Vinton and Bob Gardner.
Together they were a perfect team. They really hit gold.
This is fantastic.
He just all of a sudden got to be super big and the animation icon.
We really scaled it up. 35 million revenue.
400 people.
I'm impressed.
Will's enthusiasm was the company's greatest asset and probably the greatest danger.
When people give you a lot of money, there are expectations. They get to call a lot of shots.
Will started with just clay and a camera, and it just got out of hand.
It wouldn't be uncommon to get a phone call in the middle of the night, and it's Bob Gardner railing about Will.
He threatened to assassinate Will Vinton at the Rose Festival parade.
Things had gotten so strange there. By the time they were doing the PJs and Gary and Mike, I would say it was a completely different company.
Then the shows got canceled, and he was stuck with this big debt.
Kicked to the curb of his own company? How could he build all this up and then it gets taken away?
For him to lose his company and then not be able to use his name was just like horrifying. It was just of a particular time, this beautiful little spot, and the people who got to be part of it were lucky to be part of it.
Everything I've done is a build, is something that I've built one thing on top of the other, and the next thing I do is informed by all of those other things. I love being able to feel like my life is continuum, that things that may have felt like they might have been missteps was not at all a misstep.
So that comes out this year, and then I've got a couple other documentary series projects that are in pretty far advanced development that we're pitching. But I also there's a couple narrative projects too that, and I may or may not, direct those. I might just be kind of developing them to produce or executive produce. I think I would like to do that, but I just feel so comfortable and confident in the documentary world that it just makes sense to me.
So what do you love about indie film? What is it about indie film that calls you?
I think it's just, I love, my favorite part of the entire process is the development. So it's like that coming up with the idea and then having that feeling of like the Googling it, like, oh, has there been a documentary made about this? Or has there been this book already made? And then when you find out that no, nobody's done this, like, then you start getting excited and like just getting obsessed, like that feeling of like, oh my God, I have to do this. And I've been lucky enough to have that several times. And then getting it to a point where you have something to pitch. So like usually when I pitch something, it'll be like a 10-page PDF pitch deck along with like maybe a 2 to 5 minute pitch reel, like video. So I'll do a little bit of the work to visually show something. And that's other than the editing that comes later, those are my two favorite parts. So I think what I love about it is just I hate the word hustle, but I don't know what a better word right now is, but the hustle and just the excitement of like coming up with an idea and then bringing it to life, like something that didn't exist before. And in film, at least in indie documentary, just looking at all the components. Okay, so you had to interview all these people, you sourced all that archive, you did all the editing, all the photos, not to mention just like the business side that comes with it as well too. It's it's so much that goes into a
and
film.
then telling a story on top of that, making
and
sure
then
it's
story. Yeah, exactly. So, there's just so many different elements of the arts and business that are combined when you make an independent film, and you're wearing so many hats as well too. So it's about as hard as it gets. I feel like when I think about other jobs, like it's very, very hard, but it's so rewarding because of and you got to love the experience. Like I think that's the part of it. Like if you're just doing it just for the end or whatever, like you might be disappointed. But if you really love the experience, which I do, then there's nothing better.